Okay, so today we're doing something a little different. We're taking a deep dive into a request from one of our listeners.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They want to know all about the early days of Bitcoin, those kind of hazy, Wild West years from about 2009 to 2015. But they specifically wanted to hear about the people, the ones who were there right at the beginning.
Ah, the early adopters, the pioneers, the ones who took the leap. It's a fascinating period for sure. A real mix of, well, visionaries and, let's be honest, probably some folks who just stumbled into something huge.
Right. I mean, think about it. Back then, it was just this abstract idea, right? Decentralized digital cash. Most people didn't even know what to make of it.
Not to mention, it all came out right after the 2008 financial crisis, right? When trust in traditional banks was at an all-time low.
Oh, for sure. That context is key. And, our listener was kind enough to send over some source material for us to dig into.
Okay, so what are we working with?
So we've got excerpts from, looks like two different PDF documents, one called the Claude version and another called the Gemini version.
Interesting. And both focus on this early Bitcoin crew.
Yeah, seems like it. They cover the initial investors, those who started actually using Bitcoin for, transactions and stuff, and of course the real tech pioneers.
So for this deep dive, we're not just looking at Bitcoin as, this code or a white paper. We're looking at the people who brought it to life. I like it.
Exactly. We want to try to understand, what opportunities were there for these early birds?
Yeah,
But also, what kind of risks were they facing? Because let's be real, back then, nobody really knew if this whole Bitcoin thing would take off, right?
absolutely. It was a massive gamble for most of them. So I guess the million Bitcoin question is, what can we learn from their experiences, both the successes and I'm sure the inevitable mishaps along the way?
Right, the cautionary tales too. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. Bitcoin emerges in 2009. What was the initial vision, the core idea that drew people in?
Well, you got to start with the white paper, right? The one written by the mysterious Satoshi Nakamoto. Still don't know who that is for sure.
The enigma at the heart of it all. Okay, so what did the white paper actually say? Break it down for us.
Well, it lays out this system for peer-to-peer electronic cash. Think of it like this, right? Sending money directly to another person online. No bank needed.
Whoa, cut out the middleman entirely. That's a pretty radical idea, especially back then.
Right. And the whole thing's verified by this network of computers, all transactions recorded on a public ledger. This was the early blockchain in action.
The blockchain, so much talk about it now. But back then, it was totally uncharted territory.
Exactly. It was also new and experimental. No wonder most people had no clue what to make of it.
Okay, so we've got this revolutionary idea emerging in this climate of, financial distrust. People were looking for alternatives. Who were some of these early investors who took the plunge?
Well, our sources highlight some pretty interesting folks. Let's start with, well, they call him Mr. Smith. Keeps his identity anonymous. Smart move, probably.
He must have made a killing.
He did all right. Put in $3,000 back in 2010. By 2013, that turned into, get this, $2.3 million.
Oh, life-changing money. Did he cash out?
Sold at least some of it. Reportedly used the profits to travel the world. Can't say I blame him.
I mean, who wouldn't? Okay, so we've got Mr. Worldwide over here. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's Daniel Crocker, a business owner, I think, invested in 2012, held on to it for a few years, and eventually used it for a down payment on a house.
So not quite the quit your job and travel scenario, but still a real-world impact. Proves you don't need to hit the jackpot to benefit, right?
Exactly, and it highlights the hold strategy. Patience pays off, as they say. Oh, and then there's this Aussie entrepreneur, Kane Ellis. He was actually mining Bitcoin back in 2010.
Mining? Back when it was practically worthless.
Yeah, almost zero value. He even talks about selling a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin to buy a McDonald's meal.
Wow, so what was, a burger back then is now. I didn't even want to think about how much that Bitcoin would be worth today.
Right, talk about hindsight. But later on, he sold enough of his mined Bitcoin to buy a Maserati, a $200,000 Maserati.
Okay, so we've got the world traveler, the homeowner, and the luxury car guy. What a range. And this is all just from those early years, right?
Yeah, just the tip of the iceberg, really. Oh, and I almost forgot. There's this incredible story of Christopher Koff, a Norwegian engineer. He bought $27 worth of Bitcoin in 2009, almost as an afterthought while doing research for his master's thesis.
$27? That's what, a couple of pizzas back then?
Something like that. Anyway, he totally forgot about it until 2013.
Don't leave us hanging.
Turns out that $27 investment was now worth over $1 million. enough to buy himself an apartment.
No way. That's insane. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right, pure luck, some might say.
Yeah.
But it shows you, even the smallest investments could have mind-blowing results.
So we've seen some small investments, some accidental investments. Were there any big players who got involved early on, folks who really understood the tech and were willing to put down serious cash?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Take Kingsley Advani, a software engineer. He invested $34,000 in 2013. Within 6 months, that turned into, well, a seven-figure profit.
Okay, so that's a more calculated bet, someone who really saw the potential, even back then.
Right. He was willing to put down a significant chunk of change because he believed in the technology.
So it wasn't just blind luck for everyone. Some people really did see what Bitcoin could become. Any other big names?
Oh, yeah. Then you've got, like, the more celebrity investors, like the Winklevoss twins, Cameron, Tyler, the Facebook guys.
Oh, yeah, them. I remember hearing they got into Bitcoin early.
Big time. They dropped $11 million on it in 2013.
11 million. Talk about going all in. Did it pay off?
Oh, yeah. They're Bitcoin billionaires now.
See, this is the kind of stuff that makes people think, man, I should have bought Bitcoin back then.
Right. Total hindsight bias.
But hey, it's easy to say that now. Back then, it was a huge risk.
Totally. Oh, and we can't forget about Tim Draper, venture capitalist. He bought almost 30,000 Bitcoin in a government auction back in 2014.
A government auction. What was that all about?
So the U.S. government had seized a bunch of Bitcoin from this online black market called Silk Road.
Silk Road. That was a whole other thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, a wild story for another time, maybe. But the point is, Draper saw this auction as an opportunity. He clearly believed in Bitcoin's long-term potential, even with all the controversy surrounding it.
Okay, so we've got a pretty diverse bunch of early investors here.
Yeah.
From those who stumbled into it with a few bucks to those who made calculated bets with millions. What can we learn from all these different paths to Bitcoin riches?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that in those early days, there wasn't one right way to get involved. Some folks, like Mr. Smith, got in early with a small amount and rode the wave. Others, like the Winklevoss twins, made calculated large-scale investments based on, their belief in the technology.
Right. And then you have the accidental millionaires like Christopher Koch, who just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It's kind of mind-boggling, really.
It is. But I think there are a few common threads. Like many of these early investors, whether they were tech-savvy or not, seemed to understand that Bitcoin was something truly different, something that could change the world.
They had that foresight, that vision. They saw something that most people didn't.
Exactly. And they were willing to take a risk. I mean, back then, nobody knew for sure that Bitcoin would succeed. It was volatile, unregulated, and a lot of people thought it was a fad, right?
Oh, yeah. Definitely heard that a lot back then.
Yeah.
So risk tolerance was key. And what else?
Patience. A lot of these folks held onto their Bitcoin for years, even when the price was fluctuating wildly. They believed in the long-term potential. And, some of them also had a pretty good understanding of the underlying technology.
Right. So it wasn't just blind faith. They actually did their research, at least to some extent.
Exactly. They understood the basic principles of, cryptography, decentralization, the whole blockchain concept.
Okay, so we've covered the early investors, the folks who, let's be honest, are probably who most people think of when they hear early Bitcoin. But our listener also wanted to know about the early adopters and the pioneers, the folks who weren't just in it for the money, but were actually using Bitcoin, building on it, making it more than just this, abstract idea.
Right, because investing is one thing. Actually using Bitcoin for, real-world transactions, that was a whole other ballgame back then.
Totally. So who are some of these early adopters that our sources highlight?
Well, we've got to start with Hal Finney. This guy was a true OG. He received the very first Bitcoin transaction ever from Satoshi Nakamoto himself.
Wow, that's going to be worth like an NFT or something these days.
Yeah, right. Historical significance for sure. But beyond that, Finney was one of the very first people to actually run the Bitcoin software. He was a real believer in the technology. And, get this, years before Bitcoin, he had even developed the first reusable proof-of-work system, a concept that, became a key part of how Bitcoin transactions are verified.
So this wasn't just some random guy who got lucky. He was a serious cryptographer, a true pioneer.
Absolutely. A giant in the field. And then, of course, you've got Laszlo Hanyecz, maybe the most famous or infamous early adopter of all.
The pizza guy.
The one and only. Back in May 2010, he made the first documented real-world purchase using Bitcoin. traded 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 pizzas.
2 pizzas. I mean, that's got to be the most expensive pizza order in history, right?
Probably. And at the time, it was a pretty big deal. It showed that Bitcoin could actually be used to buy stuff, in the real world.
It moved it beyond just this, like, theoretical idea.
Yeah.
Made it tangible.
Exactly. And then there's Marty Malmy. He went by Sirius Online, another one of those early collaborators with Satoshi. He actually conducted the very first Bitcoin to USD trade.
So he was the one who kind of put a real-world price tag on Bitcoin.
Yeah, you could say that. He also built the first Bitcoin marketplace called Bitcoin Market, and he maintained like the original bitcoin.org website and the Bitcoin Talk forum.
Wow. So he was really instrumental in building the early infrastructure for Bitcoin, creating the spaces where people could actually, buy, sell, and discuss it.
Exactly, laying the foundation for the community that would, eventually grow into what we have today.
Okay, and then there's Gavin Andresen, right?
Mhm.
He was kind of a bridge between those early days and the more, I guess, mainstream adoption that came later.
Yeah, Andreessen was key. He created the first Bitcoin faucet. Remember those? They were websites that just gave away small amounts of Bitcoin for free, just to get people interested, to get them to actually use it.
Oh, yeah. I remember trying those out.
Yeah.
You'd solve a CAPI-TCHA or something, and boom, you'd get, like, a fraction of a Bitcoin.
Yep, that was Andreessen. He wanted to spread the Bitcoin love. And then, when Satoshi Nakamoto disappeared, Andreessen became the lead developer for the Bitcoin project.
So he kind of stepped into the void left by the mysterious creator. That's a huge responsibility.
It was. He was essentially the face of Bitcoin for a while, and he co-founded the Bitcoin Foundation, which was all about promoting Bitcoin and its development.
Okay, so we've got these investors, these adopters, all these people pushing Bitcoin forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? Our sources also mention some pretty major losses and setbacks in those early years. Stuff that honestly is kind of scary to think about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The early days were definitely a wild ride. Lots of risks, lots of unknowns.
Okay, so let's talk about those cautionary tales. What are some of the big ones that stand out?
Well, the story of James Howells is a classic. It's kind of a meme at this point, but it's a tragic reminder of how easily things can go wrong.
Oh, what happened?
So, back in 2013, he accidentally threw away a hard drive.
Okay, happens to the best of us.
Except this hard drive contained the private keys to 8,000 Bitcoin.
Whoa. Okay, so for those who don't know, private keys are like the passwords to your Bitcoin wallet, right?
Exactly. Lose those and your Bitcoin is gone forever.
So this guy basically threw away a fortune.
Yep. As the price of Bitcoin skyrocketed, that hard drive became like this holy grail, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. People have been trying to track it down ever since.
Talk about a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how crucial it is to understand the basics of Bitcoin security.
Absolutely. And then there's Stefan Thomas, programmer who lost the password to his iron key. It's this type of like super secure USB drive.
It sounds pretty safe. What went wrong?
Well, the iron key was designed to like permanently lock you out after a certain number of incorrect password attempts.
Wait, so if you forget your password, you're screwed.
Basically. And Thomas had his private keys to 7,002 Bitcoin on that iron key.
Oh, man. Another fortune lost to a forgotten password.
Yeah.
Brutal. Okay, so those are individual losses, right? But there were also some major platform failures that impacted a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. Like the whole Gerald Cotton and Quadrig ACX situation, that was a real head scratcher.
Refresh my memory on that.
So Cotton was the CEO of this Canadian cryptocurrency exchange, Quadrig ACX. He died suddenly in 2018.
Okay.
And it turns out he was seemingly the only one who knew the passwords to the exchange's cold wallets.
Cold wallets. Those are like offline storage for Bitcoin, right?
Yes.
Super secure, supposedly.
Exactly. But because only Cotton knew the passwords, when he died, access to something like $190 million in customer funds was lost.
Wait, so all that money was just locked away because one guy held all the keys?
Pretty much. And to this day, it's still a mystery whether it was just like really bad planning or something more sinister.
Yeesh. Oh, that's a whole other level of risk. And then, of course, there's the granddaddy of all Bitcoin exchange failures, Mt. Gox.
Oh, yes, Mt. Gox. A true cautionary tale. Back in the day, it was the biggest Bitcoin exchange in the world. Everyone was using it.
So what went wrong?
Well, they got hacked. Not once, but twice. 2011 and then again in 2014. In total, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin were stolen, led to the exchange going bankrupt.
Wow. It's crazy to think that even in a decentralized system like Bitcoin, you're still vulnerable if you're relying on these centralized platforms.
Absolutely. Security is paramount. And it's not just about tech failures. The legal and regulatory landscape was super murky back then, too.
Right, because governments were just starting to figure out what to make of this whole Bitcoin thing.
Exactly. And some people got caught in the crosshairs. Take Charlie Shrem, for example.
What happened to him?
He co-founded one of the early Bitcoin exchanges, BitInstant, ended up getting sentenced to prison for his involvement with an unlicensed money transmitting business that had ties to Silk Road.
Oh, wow, so he got wrapped up in the whole Silk Road thing.
Yeah, the legal system was still trying to figure out how to apply existing laws to this new technology.
It was like the Wild West out there.
For sure.
Okay, so we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of those early years. What are the key takeaways, the lessons that we can all learn from these pioneers, both from their successes and their sometimes very costly mistakes?
Well, I think the most important lesson is that with any new technology, especially one as disruptive as Bitcoin, there are inherent risks involved.
Right, you're essentially entering uncharted territory.
Exactly. And that means you have to be extra careful, do your research, understand the technology, and be aware of the potential downsides.
So don't just blindly jump in, because you hear stories about people getting rich quick.
Definitely not. And the second big lesson, I think, is the importance of security.
Which we saw play out in some pretty dramatic ways, right?
Yeah, from lost hard drives to forgotten passwords to major exchange hacks, those early years were riddled with security breaches. It's a constant reminder that protecting your digital assets is absolutely crucial.
So secure your private keys, use strong passwords, and be very, very careful about which platforms you trust.
Absolutely. And then I think the third big takeaway is that the regulatory landscape is constantly evolving.
Right, because back then, governments were scrambling to figure out how to deal with Bitcoin.
Exactly. And things are still changing today. So it's crucial to stay informed about the laws and regulations in your jurisdiction. Don't assume that what was okay yesterday will be okay tomorrow.
Yeah, it's like a moving target. Okay, so those are some pretty important lessons, I'd say. Anything else?
Yeah, I think it's also worth remembering that, in those early days, the Bitcoin community was incredibly collaborative. It was a small group of passionate individuals who were all in it together, trying to build something new and exciting.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that in the midst of all the, price fluctuations and the dramas. But it was a real community effort.
It was, and that spirit of collaboration, I think, is something we could all learn from.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the early days of Bitcoin, what are your final thoughts for our listeners, especially for those who might be thinking about getting involved with new and emerging technologies today?
Well, I think the stories of these early Bitcoin pioneers, both their triumphs and their failures, offer some really valuable lessons. They remind us that innovation always comes with risks, but it also has the potential for incredible reward.
That's a balancing act, right?
Exactly. And, thinking about those early days when Bitcoin was just this, fringe idea, this experiment, it makes you wonder, what's the next Bitcoin? What's the next revolutionary technology that's out there right now, waiting to be discovered?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's out there somewhere, for sure. And the lessons we've talked about today, they apply to any new tech. Do your research, be security conscious, and be aware of the risks. But also, don't be afraid to take a chance to be part of something new and exciting.
Exactly. The next Bitcoin could be anything. And the only way to find out is to stay curious, stay informed, and, well, maybe take a few calculated risks along the way.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll be doing a deep dive into the early days of, I don't know, quantum computing or something.
Seems like a plan.
All right, well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And remember, the future is out there, just waiting to be built.
And learned from. Definitely learned from.